This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know. We are here with Daniel Goldman. Nice Jewish name. Daniel is the chairman of the board at Gesher, which literally means bridge, and we're going to learn exactly how appropriate that name is very shortly. But we're here in a beautiful neighborhood, I believe called Roscoe, within Jerusalem. And how are you, Daniel?
I'm fantastic. Great to be with you, Ari.
Thank you so much. And as you can hear from Daniel's accent immediately here, it is not Jerusalemite. It is something else. So where is that accent from, and where are you from?
I am originally from the northeast of England, a provincial city called Newcastle, which has a very warm but small Jewish community.
And wasn't there a Netflix show called Newcastle?
Oh, there have been several about my locale.
What's unique about it?
Well, first of all, our accent. You don't hear it today, but if I spoke in the local accent, it would be very difficult for your listeners.
Can you give us a quick, like a little snippet?
Yes, so we'd say, how are you? How are you today? How are the bairns? And have you had your tackle for lunch today?
Nice. Now, is that Cockney or is that something else?
That is Geordie.
Geordie.
Which means somebody from Newcastle.
Wow, cool.
In fact, your listeners may not be aware that many of the call centers in the United Kingdom are situated in the northeast of England because the accent and the friendliness are more conducive to good customer relations.
Interesting. I was going to say because companies are often committed to having terrible customer service, and if they don't want anyone to understand what they're saying.
We're also well known for football, and originally coals to Newcastle, and obviously all that stuff, the coals and industrial stuff has gone away, so there's kind of regeneration, but
right. Wow.
Anyhow, it's a little bit Rust Belt in your probably terminologies.
How far is it from London?
It's an hour's flight.
Hour's flight? So maybe a 3-4 hour drive.
Yeah. All right.
Got it. And is it really its own ecosystem in terms of Judaism as well?
So we have the northeastern community, of which Newcastle is more or less the only thing left. There were several other provincial communities, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Darlington. Even I mean, talking about my community today is probably 500 Jews.
Wow.
Okay, I haven't lived there for 26 years, but that's my alma mater, if you will. But next to Newcastle, which is a sort of traditional British Jewish community, is a separate community called Gateshead.
Sure.
And Gateshead is an ultra-Orthodox, much more self-contained, with its own, yeshivot, academies, and so forth. So there is a kind of ecosystem between Newcastle and Gateshead, but it's literally crossing a different bridge.
Was there any overlap between the two communities? Did they have any interaction with each other?
Yeah, so for example, when I was growing up in Newcastle, I would go to Gateshead for, Jewish classes.
Ah, got it. And was Newcastle part of this United Synagogue, kind of this umbrella?
So United Synagogue is typically the London communities, but the style of United Synagogue, under the auspices, if you will, of the office of the chief rabbi, our synagogue was definitely in that sort of mainstream orthodoxy.
Got it. So the chief rabbi manages more than just United Synagogue.
Correct.
I always assumed that United Synagogue was kind of the umbrella.
Actually, technically, he is the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth.
And the Commonwealth. Now, what's in the Commonwealth? Is that like Ireland or something?
Canada, South Africa, Australia.
So Rabbi Mervis today is the chief rabbi of Canada?
No, but that is his title. Yeah.
It's just the presumptuous.
He's as much the chief rabbi of Canada as the Queen is the Queen of Australia.
There we go. So now, David, how did you leave the UK and the Commonwealth immediately after your maturation into young adulthood, or what was your journey?
So basically I completed my studies in the UK, including university.
Where?
In London University. And I made Aliyah straight away after that, when I was 23.
Why?
I'm an old-fashioned Zionist. I grew up, as I say, I used to go to Gateshead for Jewish classes, but I also went to B'nai Kiva, the religious Zionist youth group, where we had a chapter there on Shabbat. So I was kind of doing all that stuff all together, and in the end, that was the natural. I like to say that when you go to the football game or soccer, if you will, you have the people on the pitch and the people in the stands.
Yeah.
And in order to have a club, you need to have all of those people. But I wanted to be on the pitch, and I felt that the core of the development of the Jewish people is going to be here. So
Wow.
I wanted to be in the game.
In the
if you
game.
will.
Wow. Did you, was this something that was really nurtured throughout your childhood? Like,
Yeah.
push, make aliyah, make aliyah?
Not to that extent, but
Okay.
I come from a Zionist family. My parents, who were traditional, were always very Israel affiliated, Israel oriented.
Yeah.
The equivalent of the kind of Jewish Federation and giving to Israel, UJA, that type of stuff. So my parents were always pro that, so it probably wasn't a complete surprise
Right.
to them when me and my brother, we
I was
both.
going to say, if anybody else in the family.
So we are two, and we both made Aliyah. We both live in Bet Shemesh. So all the next generation of our gig is over here.
That's beautiful. Did your parents ever follow suit?
Sadly, my dad only made it to Hamanuchot. He was buried here.
Aye.
He always dreamt, actually, of coming here. Well, being well, my mum next year will make Aliyah.
Oh, beautiful. That's
Yes.
wonderful. Will she live near the boys?
She will be around the corner from the boys.
Amazing. Wonderful, wonderful. So what did you do when you came to Israel? You had already studied at that point. So what was your degree in?
So I have a degree in engineering and business.
Economics? I know the London School of Economics.
So I was I studied in two different colleges in London. One was more engineering oriented, one was more management oriented. But if I tell you that I was never an engineer and not much of a manager, and in fact the first thing I did when I came to Israel was to continue studying, and I actually trained in special education
Interesting.
and music,
Wow. Very different.
which I worked in for a number of years, mostly with sort of post-psychiatric teenagers and that sort of stuff.
And doing music therapy?
Yeah, music therapy.
How would that function? What would that look like?
It can be one-on-one, or it can be in a group, and it's mostly using improvisational techniques in music to allow kids or teenagers to express themselves in in a non-verbal way. If you know or love music, you'll understand that if you can touch what we call in the music therapy trade the music child, you can actually get to the most inner, deeper part of a person's being, and often you can strip away all of the occasionally the things which they create tough envelopes like an onion. If you can peel away, you can get into the deepest feelings of a person beyond language, and music is one of the most powerful things to do that, and that's what I used to do with my clients or pupils or whatever.
Would they like write lyrics, or it was really just the playing?
It depends
itself?
on level of functioning.
Yeah.
I worked at one stage I worked in a psychiatric hospital with a teenager who probably, were not for the fact that he was psychiatric, could have been a professional concert pianist.
Wow.
But he couldn't get out of bed in the morning because of his psychosis.
Wow.
So, and I had to do an audition with him in order for him to, quote unquote, an audition, in order for him to accept
That you were worthy of.
I was worthy of working with him.
Wow.
Now, he was a much better musician
Right.
than I was. So we used to do duets on the piano. That would be, and getting him to focus actually on playing that, setting time aside, doing the practice, actually, fixing on, I'm actually going to get out of bed, clean my teeth, and play the piano. That was part of his, therapy.
So it's not just that the music itself was a form of expression, but it was actually a form of an activity of structure.
Yeah, it's almost behavioral. So you have, it's a different, and you have kids who are very, very low functioning, that if you can get them to, hit a Glock in time, then, you're able to do that. One other thing which I think is a potential segue for us later is, if you think about a group of 10 psychiatric teenagers, if they can listen to one another playing, and even play together, they can learn some social behavior that the psychiatric illness has taken away from them.
Yeah.
And it's a way for them to, okay, I'm listening to him, he's listening to me, we're going to play together. It's a kind of proxy for social interaction.
Interesting.
and that sort of I'm going to make space for somebody else now
Right.
to make music or speak, whatever, is something which has definitely stayed with me into the work of the building that we're in currently.
Amazing. What's your particular instrument of choice?
I play the piano, I play the violin, I sing. I used to sing in choirs and stuff like that. I don't do it enough.
I was going to say, do you get to do any of that stuff today?
Not enough.
Dabble.
Yeah, exactly. It's still
Wow.
fun for me. When I need the quiet moment, I still go to the piano.
Wow. I mean, I just took up piano actually about 2 years ago myself.
Oh, wonderful.
Started taking lessons with a lady in my neighborhood, and
Wonderful.
yeah, my wife as well. So it's been a,
Wow, wonderful.
I don't want to say midlife renaissance in that regard, but it's been a
In Hebrew, we call it a pinuk.
Pinuk.
It's a pinuk.
There you go.
Spoil yourself. Why
It's
not?
been fabulous. A wonderful outlet.
Terrific. We all need it.
So you were working in music therapy for quite a while.
Yeah.
But you no longer. So
That's
so
correct.
what
I made the switch
changed?
20 plus years ago into business.
Want to start making some money?
I realized that being a music therapist is good for volunteering. So basically, I kind of reverted a little bit back to the things I'd learned previously. I joined a bank. I worked in a venture capital fund.
Oh, wow.
And then about 20 years ago, I founded my own firm, and I've been running with two partners a business firm, investments, advice, and so forth for 20 plus.
So it's an investment advisory, or it's a VC
It's family
itself?
office. It's merged into, it's developed into a multi-family office. So we advise.
You're managing a few families.
We advise multiple families who are in multiple regimes. So they're in different places around the world. They have complicated life stories. The more complicated, the better for us. And actually, a lot of the skills and experience about listening to people's life and understanding what that means for how to help them to get it organized, stuff that I wouldn't want to say that my clients are special needs, but they are special people. And with great wealth often comes responsibility and complication.
Yeah.
And not everybody is, often when it's your situation, you need somebody else, like chavruta, a partner, to figure it out, and that's what we're there.
So when you're talking about complicated situations, you're saying, because there's different family
siblings
members,
and family
conflict,
business and conflict, and even where there's no conflict, there is how do I transfer wealth and values to the next generation? At what age should I give access and education and knowledge to my kids, who may be a second or third generation for the wealth, and how do I equip them for a useful life, even if they don't have to go out to work?
Right, trust fund kind of.
Exactly, second and third generation. And most of the people that we know, and most of the people in the world, have to get out of bed in the morning to put bread on the table and milk in the fridge. If you don't have that requirement, you need something else.
Right.
And it can be business, but it doesn't have to be business. It can be philanthropy, it can be making music, it can be volunteering in Africa, it can be, but you need something to get that passion to get me out of bed in the morning.
It's interesting that you play that role, because I don't think people imagine an investment advisor as necessarily playing that kind of a role.
In our office, my title is the CSO. I'm the Chief Schmooze Officer.
How do you identify or source clients?
Word of mouth.
Oh, word of mouth.
Totally. We do not advertise. We don't market. We just.
But do you actively take on new clients, or are you really just managing a couple of families?
Normally, we can probably take on a couple of new clients a year.
So it's a basket of families. It's not just one
Correct.
major family.
That's correct.
And then, are you primarily investing for them in Israel, or
No, it's totally global. Totally.
all the markets? And
Any asset class, any market.
and you work with larger banks and things like that?
Yeah,
or-
in the parlance, we work on a completely independent open platform system. So we don't manage directly a cent. We allocate to third-party managers.
So you might give
we have
an
best of
allocation to
breed.
Goldman or allocation to.
Yeah, we're typically looking for best of breed in a particular asset class. So we want the best equity manager, for North America or emerging markets or Europe, and we want the best debt, and we want the best in real estate. So we're actually we're typically going around the major institutions to the significant but much smaller guys whose speciality is we do multi-res in the tri-state area,
Right.
or private equity in Japan, or debt in Europe, or whatever.
Right. So you'll invest in smaller groups if they're.
Correct. Yes, always, almost always, actually.
So not necessarily the large banks and
There are things
investment houses.
there are things that they do better,
Right.
and
Or
therefore,
access that they have sometimes.
and sometimes it's access. Although post the financial crisis, access is less of an issue.
Really?
Yeah. There's, I wouldn't say modesty, but they've understood that even the big funds can't just shut themselves away.
Interesting. So what's that experience been like working in this space in Israel? And are your partners American, Israeli,
I have
British?
a former Australian as a partner and a former Georgian,
Georgian.
as in Atlanta, Georgia.
I was going to say, like,
Yeah,
Russia.
no, the former
Communist.
Soviet Union. And then in the office we have British accents and Aussie accents and American accents and so forth. And probably then, not surprisingly, 90% of our clients are Anglo-Saxon in some shape or form. We sort of measure it by passports. So we have families with 2 passports, 1 passport, 3 passports, Israel, UK, Israel, US.
If they ever get arrested, maybe no passport. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, it's
So far we haven't had to bring in the crisis management team.
which I imagine would be you.
Well, again, if there are things that we feel we can take care of, we do it ourselves, and wherever we feel that there's an expert required, our job is to project manage in the best of breed in lawyers and family experts and whatever. So we work alongside people with expertise in particular areas because our job is to bring best of breed always to our clients, and they need to be confident that we have sourced for them not just the best in investment, but the best in lawyer and the best in tax and the best in.
How does an office like yours earn profit? Is it commission based or it's the
Fixed fee.
Fixed fees and that's it?
So we agree when we begin what the scope of the work looks like, what the assets are, how many family members, how many different geographic centers. We have this kind of a basket of services.
Right.
I wouldn't say it's a completely scientific pricing, but it's a fixed fee. And then, you can call me 20 times a day or once every 3 weeks, and I'm not looking at the clock. I'm not a sort of PwC or a law firm where
you're not billing and you're not.
No.
But you're also not working on commission.
And part of the culture that I try and make sure that all of my colleagues have is when you are servicing a client, please never think how much we're charging him. Treat every single client without concern to whether they're. But we have clients obviously that are more profitable, less profitable, depending on how many times they call us a day, right? So really, what we're trying to achieve is an atmosphere or a style of service, so that every one of our clients thinks we are their single family office. So that's kind of the ethos that we, and that's a challenge when you go like
you have somebody,
yeah. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that and then acting.
Probably having enough personnel to deliver on that.
Absolutely.
Now, although you said you invest worldwide, I imagine that this particular position has given you an interesting perch from which to observe the burgeoning Israeli economy. And
well, and for a number of years we were very active directly in sort of VC and private equity investing in Israel.
So what's been your analysis of what's going on in the Israeli scene?
So I think at the macro level, Israel continues to be an unbelievable, vibrant economy. We have this slight bifurcation where you have a very high added value part of the economy, which is the sort of tech and high tech sector, where salaries and the ability to generate personal wealth is meaningful. So you can go in as a regular employee and end up with you may not be a billionaire, but you can generate proper, meaningful
stock options
wealth,
and things like that,
stock options and so forth, and in salary. But that represents probably 10-12% of the total economy.
Right.
So it drives a significant amount of the value add, but 90% of the economy is in old economy.
Yeah.
And relatively speaking, if you do all the measurements by OECD and so forth, that old economy is actually lagging what old economy looks like in other places.
Interesting. Even when you compare apples to apples, it was old economy.
Compare apples to apples.
Interesting.
And we have some, because actually the domestic market is relatively small, the ability to generate productivity in those parts of the economy is relatively poor. So there's a significant wage stagnation around those areas. And there's skill shortages in some of the old economy areas. And then overlay onto that, we have two, let's call them special populations, who are vastly underemployed.
Right.
Both in terms of the quantity of that employment and the quality of that employment.
Right.
And those are two big sort of economic / social challenges that we need to,
Right.
and they need to be in the bell curve. They need to be in high tech, but they need to be elsewhere as well. And for your listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, we've got the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox population, which we deal with a lot in this building. And the second one is the Arab population, which is typically the Arab women, okay, who are vastly underemployed. And certainly one of the challenges for the Israeli economy is to get that integration piece going. And it's about skills, and it's also about acculturation, sort of cultural gaps.
Right, right. I think it was somebody told me recently that I think it's by 2028, 40% of first graders will be from ultra-Orthodox homes, which has,
it's a demographic
massive
forecast.
impacts,
Yes.
future impact for the...
yes, particularly if they continue to study
correct.
the things they're currently
This
studying.
nut has to be cracked in the next 20 years, or
Exactly.
the economy is going to be in...
Yeah,
really-
it's a generational question.
Yeah.
It's not what's happening tomorrow morning. It's a generational question. But things which are not initiated soon, there won't be time to.
Ripple effects.
Exactly.
So you mentioned we're sitting here in this building,
Yeah.
which is called Gesher, again, which
Yeah.
means bridge. And the truth is I know very little about it other than it's building some kind of bridges between these disparate populations within Israel.
That's right.
And I think many people are aware that there are some fissures within Israeli society, and some can be very factionalized. So what exactly is Gesher? How did you come to the picture? And tell us a little bit about this place.
So I think in my personal history, the turning point for me in terms of how I look at Israeli society was 1995 and the assassination
Of Rabin, yeah.
Rabin.
And you were here already at that point?
Yeah, I was here already 3 years.
Oh, wow, good.
And my kind of wake-up moment was that if you consider this to be the kind of third Jewish Commonwealth, Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, etc., the thing which threatens that is not our relations with our neighbors or the Palestinians. Not that is not important. Of course, it's important.
Sure.
But actually, what potentially undermines the integrity of Israel as a home for the Jewish people is actually the ability for the Jews to get on. And to understand what that ethos looks like after 2,000 years of not having that sovereignty. And if one Jewish Israeli can take a gun and shoot the personification of that sovereignty, the Prime Minister, then we have a serious problem.
Right.
And it's not about the person who took the gun, nor is it about the person who was assassinated. It's about what does that mean at a deeper level for Israeli society and for Jewish society within Israeli society. So that was kind of a aha for me. And in a sense, the activities that Gesher is trying to promote is really totally focused on that question. And as a sort of title, what I'd like to suggest is that, and I think it's also a very Jewish idea, that the differences and the variety, sometimes the stark differences in approach or philosophy, religious approach, economic, social approach, instead of that being on the side of on the debt side of the balance sheet, it should be on the equity side of the balance sheet, i.e., we should turn that to being an asset for the Jewish people, i.e., that variety, that debate, the harshness of difference of opinion is something that which should be a source of vibrancy and not a source for disaster. And that's a tricky thing to achieve. And in fact, I think it's difficult for people to visualize. And the metaphor that I try to give is like, and it goes back to music. Unity is a synonym for harmony. Harmony in music is created when you have a set of different instruments who come together, each playing a different line of music, and actually through a great deal of hard work and practice, eventually they can play Beethoven's Ninth or whatever. And one of the secrets to the success of an orchestra is that when the violinist walks into the practice hall, he's the best violinist he knows how to be. He spent already a lot of time figuring out what type of violinist he wants to be, which type of violin he is going to play, who was his teacher, and he's loyal to the instrument and to the tradition of Stradivarius or whoever, Paganini. And the same is true for the flautist, and the same is true for the double bass and the cello and the guy playing the triangle, and so on and so forth. And then when he sits at his desk to be the violinist, what he then needs to do is to open his mind to say, oh, hang on a minute, I see around me other violinists and cellists and trombonists and so forth. And in order for us to make this harmony, I also have to make space for this other music to exist. And then once I've listened carefully, once I've, once I've sort of drawn back myself a little bit, and I hear this other music, it doesn't make me any less of a violinist. But together it makes something that apart we can't possibly ever achieve.
Yeah.
That's the type of ethos that I'm trying to drive as the driving force to Gesher. And that has a huge amount of application when you talk about the public space in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about how are we going to, on the one hand, have a Jewish atmosphere, but in a way that everybody can plug into that. So take Shabbat, for example. Can we have Shabbat, which is for some people halachic? Okay, it's going to be by the letter of the law according to all the most stringent traditions, but for some people it's going to be cultural, which means that they'll need public transport on Shabbat, because for them Shabbat means I'm going to have a meal with my mother or grandmother or parents, and they live in a different city and I have to get to them.
Right.
So is there a way for us to have a win-win on those things rather than a win-lose? That's the music I'm trying to generate. The way that we do that is that we work with lots of varied populations in lots of different environments. So we work in high schools, bringing religious and secular high schools together. We work in the army, so all of our West Point, what we call here Bad Echad, all of our army officers trainees, they go through a 2-day Gesher seminar.
Really?
As part of their officer training.
Wow.
Which for them is, if you think about you're an officer in the Israeli army, you're going out to risk your life. So number one, who for? And number two, who are the soldiers that you are taking out with you? And remember that if you've got a battalion of infantry soldiers, they may be Jewish, they may be Arab, they may be Bedouin, they may be Druze, they may be religious, they may be secular. Today they may even be Haredi, ultra-Orthodox. How can I get those guys in a sort of microcosm of what we're talking about? And risking your life is a kind of pinnacle of putting it out there. And if you want that to happen, you have to have people covering each other, right? I gotta have your back. You gotta have mine. I need not to worry about the fact that when I'm covering you, literally, you're gonna cover me.
Right.
So part of what we do is that type of seminar. And a lot of what we are discussing there is, if we sort of mention the Shabbat as something which is halachic or cultural, so in a sort of slightly parallel, we'd say, we look and analyze for people what is the element of their Israeli identity, what is their elements of their Jewish identity, which of those things are in tandem or synergistic, which of them can be sometimes in conflict. Sometimes we're confused which sits where.
Yeah, and I think it's a tricky question for Israelis. I've had many conversations with them about this.
And in normal everyday life over breakfast, we're not talking about it.
Right.
And therefore, like everything else, once you put the whiteboard up and you have a group of 15 guys coming from different parts of Israeli society and you put it on the table, lots of interesting things begin to happen. Our expertise is to create a space where it can be done without getting into people's throats.
Right.
Or at people's throats. Allowing that conversation, which can touch on exceedingly sensitive issues like, why didn't your friends go to the army, right? If I'm sitting opposite a ultra-Orthodox Jew where the vast majority do not serve in the army, the first thing that will come up as a secular Israeli or a non-Haredi Israeli is, well, you don't even deserve to be at the table, okay? And so to be able to have a more constructive conversation even about the most difficult issues, religion and state, the army, how things are done here, That is our expertise.
Now, when was Gesher actually founded, and by whom? And
It was founded in the early 70s
oh wow,
by a Oleh from the Bronx,
interesting.
Danny Tropper, Rabbi Dr. Danny Tropper, YU graduate, who made Aliyah in the late 60s
Wow.
and saw the tensions between religious and secular. I think it's completely it is not an accident that somebody came from a diaspora community.
Right.
Where the idea of communities living side by side and finding the places to cooperate together, even if
Right,
in other
federations,
things,
JCC, that kind of
federations,
stuff,
boards of rabbis, all
Right.
this type of stuff. That kind of genetic experience
Yeah.
undoubtedly brought him, and as an outsider looking in a little bit to the situation of Israeli society, I think that there's no surprise to me that a guy from overseas did that. It's probably not a surprise that I'm from the UK and I'm the chairman. So he was the founder. He ran it for about 30-something years,
Wow.
and I've been chairman for about 7 years. Been involved for nearly 20 years.
Did you find it early when you came here?
So I joined the board of Gesher in 2000.
So pretty early on into your tenure in Israel.
Yes,
And it sounded like you were already thinking about these
Yes,
issues and kind
totally.
of,
Absolutely. It fit to my way of thinking very much. And it's not directly associated with any segment or sector of Israeli society. Okay, and we take you around here. It's a little bit holiday time, but if I took you around, the staff and our moderators, we have around 25 staff, and we have about 150, 200 freelance moderators that
Wow.
go through a Gesher training. It's an extremely sought after position. We probably recruit 20 or 30 on an annual basis, and we have 1,000 applicants.
wow.
And you'll see that it's Beitar to Meretz, Haredi to secular, Ashkenazi, Sfaradi, North and South. And that is, of course, we must have that. We must be that orchestra if we're going to sell that orchestra. We got to do it. And our board, of course, is also diverse. It's Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and male and female, and Haredi and secular, and army and business, and it's all those things. So we definitely are seeking to create that model and then share that model with others. Today, our kind of mission statement is how to create shared living within Israeli society. Okay, we know that some of the flashpoints are actually down in the field, fighting over what does the street look like on Shabbat, who is going to determine what modesty is going to be applied in a neighborhood. How much autonomy do I give to a neighborhood that is secular, and how much autonomy do I give to a neighborhood which is ultra-Orthodox? And what happens when those two neighbors are side by side? How do we resolve those almost inevitable conflicts? Maybe one other sort of piece of background on the infrastructure of Israeli society, which your listeners I think will be helpful, is for historic and political reasons, our education system is divided up into subsectors of society. So we have what's called the mamlechti, the state system, which is typically for the secular community. We have what's called mamlechti dati, which is for the religious Zionist community, which probably in the US is more modern Orthodox, if you will. We have chinuch atzmai, which is actually a brand name, but let's call it the Haredi sector, which is pretty much exclusively Haredi. And then we have the Arab sector, who has their own education system. And without getting into either the history or the good or the bad of why that is in place, what that means is that you can grow up here from kindergarten to 18 and possibly beyond, and have never experienced any meaningful meeting of minds, dialogue, debate, argument with somebody from one of the other sectors of society. And in those formative years where you're developing not just your personality from an individual perspective, but your kind of societal personality, how I reflect on diversity, the other within society, you're not having exposure to what that other looks like. And the way I try and sort of explain it is, if you're wearing a white shirt on a white background, it's very hard to differentiate yourself from the arena. If you're wearing a white shirt on a black background, you know exactly who you are.
Right.
You can like it, dislike it, change it, but you can't really do anything about it if you're white on white, or black on black, or pink on pink, doesn't matter. And so actually the bringing together of people from different identities and backgrounds, not only does it allow me to know what Ari's identity looks like, but actually it allows me to fine-tune, get in touch with, sometimes rework or redesign.
Right.
Not that I'm going to throw it out, but actually I've seen what Ari has to offer, and actually I like what I have. If you never saw anything else, you have nothing to benchmark against.
Right.
And what the alternative, of course, is I can demonize Ari, and it doesn't matter whether Ari is secular or ultra-Orthodox or Arab or Bedouin or Druze or whatever, but the easiest thing for me to say, all the rubbish is over there and all the good is over here. This is a non-sophisticated way of building a societal personality. So we're kind of, for historical reasons, we're starting at a deficit.
Right.
We're really starting at a deficit, which is why our encouragement to sort of government and philanthropy is the sooner we can get started on this kind of meeting, and the more regular we can have those meetings, whether it's through the media or in schools or whatever it is, the more likelihood, not that I want Ari to change who he is, but for him to appreciate that there are, if he's the violin, I'm the double bass.
Right. So how are what are some of the specific programs that have been implemented, and are most of these programs at this point kind of legacy programs that have been in place for years?
Terrific
or
question.
Is there constant evolution with the changing
So
society?
the sort of legacy, the core of what we've done forever and ever is the high schools.
Okay, and how does that function?
So that functions in two different ways. At a kind of high level, it's where we can get the agreement of a secular and a religious school to have a joint seminar
About
Israeli and Jewish identity.
Straight to the core. In other words, not just getting together for
It's
a speaker about whatever,
No.
but actually
No, absolutely. And our skill is within a day or 2 days, quickly to bring people to that capability. All right, that's what we do. And we've done that for many, many years. We've added in that sort of age group over the last couple of years, and we'll probably do more and more of it, is to work with the youth movements, Bnei Akiva, Noah Velomed, Abonim, etc., the religious and secular, for two reasons. One is in an informal educational environment, your ability to have moderated type sessions is much greater, fits in very easily with the type of, again, where you're coming from, the NCSYs or USY type of
informal education.
Informal education. And B, I don't know if this is true for the community over in the States, it tends to be that those who have been active in youth movements will probably be more likely in a higher proportion to be in leadership.
Right.
Because these are your most passionate, most socially aware and active people. So part of what we've tried to do over the last sort of decade or so is say, well, we have a limited resource. Let's go after those who are going to be the influencers. Let's influence the influencers.
Sure.
And whereas there are thousands of schools and tens of thousands of pupils, there are 5 youth movements that cover 750,000 kids. If I can get in the room the heads of those movements and then get genetically plugged into how they train their leadership, my exposure to is if I think market share,
right.
I'm not going to be in 10% market share, I can get to 80% market share.
And has that been happening? Are the movements receptive?
Very much so.
Yeah.
That itself was a significant process because the movements are also in silos.
Sure.
And they have real ideological differences. I mean, they reflect very much the same type of ideological...
These aren't arbitrary distinctions.
No, these are this is not social groups. These are ideological movements with real history and a real portfolio of ideas, and whether it's ideas on politics, economics, Jews and Arabs, Palestinians, religion and state, universal ideas versus particular ideas.
So how are you able to influence them or convince them, so to speak?
So the first stage with that, which was a really fascinating process, we took the leaders away. We brought them to the UK Jewish community.
As a group?
As a group.
Wow. I'm amazed you could get them all at once.
So the good news is that within the education ministry, there's what's called the Youth Group Council.
Ah, okay. So there's a pre-existing sort of structure there.
Which doesn't do that much. But
at least they have scheduled meetings or something.
Exactly. And they had, for reasons which are not that interesting, they opened an opportunity for us to take them to the UK, to spend a very intensive week with all sections of the Jewish community. How does student life look? How does communal life look? What does lay leadership look like? What does spiritual leadership look like? How do they interact with government? Everything. They saw a really high level, very intense, what does community look like? And as opposed to the US, which is 5 million Jews and an exceedingly disparate sort of pockets of leadership, actually in the UK you can do this. It's a much more coherent community in the sense of you can do it in a few days. And one of the things which, and we now have an entire department called the sort of Leadership Institute, which is looking at programming, which is doing programming for Israeli leaders, is the trick which we discovered by taking the guys to a diaspora community is and these are great guys.
Sure.
These are really great guys.
Obviously all very accomplished.
They are really, and Jewish patriots. Every single one of them, each one with their own, they hadn't really, in their hearts, understood emotionally that they're not just part of Israeli society, but they're part of the Jewish people. And what does that mean? That means that a realization of being part of something which is so much bigger than what you are, or even your group is, or your community is. It leaves a huge amount of space to aspire, to be great. And not just great from an Israeli society perspective, but there's a whole other thing going on here. And the history of the Jewish people is a great deal more rich, actually, than the history of Israel. I mean, I love the history of Israel. It's fantastic.
It's a lot shorter.
It's a flash. It's a flash. God willing, it will continue. But it's a flash. You know, I parentheses, I took a couple of my boys on a kind of heritage tour last week up to the northeast of England.
Okay.
And outside of Newcastle, where we grew up, there's a small town called Alnwick. And in Alnwick, there is a very old castle. Which by
old
the way,
castle.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a little actually younger than the castle in Newcastle, but that's another story for another day. In Alnwick Castle,
British irony. You know.
Exactly. In Alnwick Castle, they filmed Harry Potter.
Ah.
The outdoor, some
Sure.
of the outdoor stuff. But what was interesting, we did a tour of the state rooms because actually the Duke of Northumberland still lives in Alnwick Castle, and he's lived there for 700 years. And the title, the Duke of Northumberland, is 1,000 years old. Okay, and it was William of Percy who came with the Norman Conqueror in 1066.
Oh.
And it suddenly dawns, the kids I took was 15 and 13, but the kind of, well, wait a minute, Israel is kind of, is it modern Israel or ancient Israel? Okay, and Israeli Zionist history is 120, 130 years old. Jewish history is 5,000 years old. But the experience of being Israeli is a modern experience, not an ancient experience. And suddenly Britain, which is much less old than the Jewish people, in the perception of my boys, wait a minute, this castle has been here for 700 years. And it opens your mind to thinking in the sort of what timeline, where are we on this timeline? What is the perspective about what is my responsibility? What is my position? So what all that parenthesis is to explain that when our leaders come back to Israel, their understanding of what it means to be a leader of Israeli society has changed because of their understanding that that Israeli society itself physically fits inside a wider Jewish people, but historically sits in something which has such a rich and you know, almost too rich, too overburdening sometimes, but a hugely interesting, you know, it opens your mind to questions you wouldn't otherwise think. That was the starting point for our work with the youth movements, and it's been our catalyst to work with, since about 5 years ago, about 300 Israeli leaders from business the world of not-for-profits, government and sort of quasi-government, local government, and the media. So in every group, we try and have people from all of those sectors, and men and women, and secular, religious, and ultra-Orthodox. And so that each one is a kind of microcosm, and then we have a program of meetings, that each meeting is looking at an issue within Israeli society.
So you're taking the same issues
but at a very
discussing
much
them
higher level.
and discussing them in different contexts, but it's always the same issues, and you're
Yes.
really, it's always getting back to, okay, what's the relationship between the religion and state? And
Yes.
have these media people discuss and debate it, and
Yes.
what typically emerges from such an encounter?
So there's probably
It must be very passionate in the room.
three level, yeah, totally. And again, this is a unique opportunity for these leaders in I suppose over your side of the pond you'd call it a safe space, but a place where you can really throw tough things onto the table, and everybody survives. Okay, and you get bigger by that. Surviving a difficult argument makes you a better person at the end of it.
Sure.
All right. Avoiding that bigger argument makes you a smaller person. All right. So safe place where nothing gets discussed, bad. Safe place where you can really touch the difficult issues is good. We see three things happening, and we measure this reasonably carefully with our leaders. Number one, we see across the board attitudinal change. Okay, how I relate to my ideological other, how I relate to myself, and often how I relate to my position within society and what that responsibility means. So that's pretty much 100%. Then we have a second level, which is, okay, Ari is a fellow of our leadership program. When you call me, I am available. So if you want me for a panel or another group or write an article, and that's probably 70, 80%. And then we have the gold standard, which is, okay, I am a campus rabbi, or I have a hugely successful radio show, and we have people who have the most important radio shows or TV or newspaper columns in the country.
Right.
Okay, so the guy who has the 8 to 10 o'clock in the morning slot on the most important radio station in the country is one of our fellows. The guy who runs the news today on the radio is a fellow. And we have from Haaretz and Makor Rishon and Yated Ne'eman, and we have, agents everywhere. And the highest level is, in my direct sphere of influence, what of the experience that I have had am I going to do differently now going forward? And I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
One of our alumni is the head of culture and education in Rishon LeZion, medium-sized, decently large, but medium-sized city in Israel. And she's a great sort of local government professional. And she rewrote her entire business plan for how she delivers culture and education to the 27,000 pupils, students, school-age kids in Rishon.
Wow.
So that today she has a unified set of programming that all of the kids do together. So instead of this is for the religious kids,
school and
this
school.
is for the secular kids. So she has, for example, a concert, an educational concert, which is a Andalusian orchestra doing piyut. I don't know how you sort of translate piyut, like ritual
Poetry.
Poetry, exactly, religious sacred poetry. And in the audience is religious and secular kids. Okay, I didn't spend a cent on that. I spent a couple of cents on her, and she is now. That's not a one-time hit. That's an every year hit.
Right.
That's massive impact for us. I'll give you another example. Chico Menashe, very well-known radio news broadcaster, really wonderful human being. After having been on our program on the Holocaust Day, which, as you know, is a very extremely intense day here, and is another point of potential conflict. How to remember the Holocaust.
Yes.
And do ultra-Orthodox people stand in the siren or do they not stand? And is saying Tehillim the same as standing for a siren? And is standing in a siren really a Jewish thing? There's a lot of tension around that. And he had the sort of 8 to 10 slot, the most important slot, and at 10 o'clock is the siren. So everybody's listening to the radio at 5 to 10. At 10 to 10, he chose to spotlight the Ginzach, the Haredi Holocaust Museum, which is really an archive in Bnei Brak, which is nobody knows about.
Right.
Which is an unbelievable institution. And he brought onto the show some of the people that he'd met through the course from the Haredi community to talk about every day in the Haredi community is Holocaust Day. Wow. In some way. If you go to the great Ponevezh Yeshiva in Bnei Brak and you see the pasuk, the verse from the Tanakh, it's a Holocaust memorial. I ran a meeting of Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid's anti-Haredi party, quote unquote.
Except with Dov Lippman in it. So,
yeah, indeed.
Your neighbor, presumably.
My neighbor and good friend. And some Haredi activists. And we got Yesh Atid activists, and we had a series of meetings, each one talking about the toughest issues. And we did one on Holocaust Day.
Wow.
And of course it started by everybody attacking the Haredim in the room, how come you don't stand in the siren? And one of the guys said, listen, out of respect I stand in the street, if I'm at home I don't. And there was a whole debate around that. And then the assumption of the secular people in the room was, you didn't really care about the Holocaust. And this young guy, he was 19 years old, and I don't know if he's living in Ponevezh or whatever. He was a young guy. Yeah, these were young activists. He said, look, I don't think you understand. I have too much Holocaust memorial. I feel every day when I walk into the Bet Midrash, into the study hall at Ponevezh, that it's Holocaust Memorial Day.
Right, that he's redeeming
every day, that burden is on me.
Well, I mean, that's how these yeshivas, great yeshivas, were built in many cases.
That's what they were built
Ponevezh and Rav.
That's what they were built for.
These were survivors who came to say, we have to rebuild Europe.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
And you sort of have that, you see in the eyes of the interlocutor, of this young Haredi guy, he's not apologizing for himself,
right.
But he is getting an opportunity to explain for the first time to some secular people without it being us versus them.
Right.
And I'm not saying that they walked out and like, I don't mind if you stand or don't stand in the siren. That's going to continue to bother everybody.
Right.
But they had a first realization that I'm the violin, you're the flute, he's the trombone,
right.
But actually we're in some way working on the same score. And that is the transition that we see it. We see it every day, and often the fellows actually work together on projects afterwards. So we have what sounds stupid, right? Almost banal, but media people who came on the course are now inviting one another to their shows, columns, newspapers, etc.
It's cross-pollination, and yeah.
It's like, oh, hey, how did I not think of that before?
Yeah.
Well, if you don't chat, we don't take down the demonization walls,
right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of, it sort of generates a variety. It generates an understanding that actually multi-voice, multi-vocal, is something which creates good music.
Yeah.
And everybody loves good music.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you like Led Zeppelin or Mozart. Everybody knows when they've heard really good music. All right, it's transcendental. You know, in those moments when you hear a Bach, right, and you like, just for a moment, you're in touch with the divine, right?
Just last night I was walking around. My wife and I were walking down Jaffa Street, and from the distance we heard this amazing voice. And we turned, it was a Haredi singer, guitarist, with presumably his wife in a huge headscarf, playing an exquisite violin.
Wow!
And the two of them on the street corner, and it was just, it was not your average street performer. They were magnificent.
They were clearly something special.
And everyone just stopped. and everyone stopped, and people just gathering around. It was amazing.
Tell me that wasn't a transcendental moment.
It was. It surely was. Daniel, if any, do you get pushback ever from some of these communities saying,
every day.
So how do you, what's the pushback and how do you deal with it?
We don't have the chance to be too nuanced here.
Right.
So I'll do it in broad brush strokes. The Haredi community has been brought up on an ideal of separation.
Right.
And that outsiders are there to change us.
Right.
And not in a good way. So they are burdened by the history of emancipation and the history of secularization,
sure,
and the threat of modern society and the lack of morals in liberal, progressive, Western, di-da-di-da-di-da.
Yep.
So any individual or organization that approaches the Haredi community with anything which is anything other than functional,
right,
is immediately a concern.
Right. So it has to be very utilitarian.
So we have to like a good company would do. We have to market the product in a way that the community wants it, and I mean that in an authentic fashion. They need to believe I'm not coming to missionize, okay? And that is true in almost the mirror reverse for the secular community.
Be coerced and brainwashed. And
there's a huge debate, dialogue, quite vociferous about what's called here hadata, or kfiyah datit, right?
Yep.
Religious enforcement, coercion. And so, anybody with a kippah who's coming with a message is a missionary.
Right.
Okay? And the way I like to sometimes describe it, because words are really important in life, I'll do it in Hebrew and we'll try and translate it. So religious people talk about kiruv as a process for people getting more religious. Mm-hmm. Secular people tend to talk about lehitchazek, to be stronger in their beliefs. And the difference is, sociologically, even if it's not meant to be this way, is that kiruv is, I'm going to bring you closer to my position. Lehitchazek is, from where I stand, I'm going to move. And I'm like, I want to be where you are, and let's go off together to discover what our common path is. I don't need for you to cross the table. And secular people and religious people alike don't want to be missionized. Nobody wants to be missionized. Right. Frankly, I understand them. I too do not like to be missionized. Right. And so what we try and do is, one of the transitions that we've made over the last 10 years is from being educational to be moderators. So we don't come with a outcome, now we come with a path. So we are enabling our participants to figure it out, rather than a good educational programmer would saying, I want to get to the Israeli flag at the end, it's going to look like this. And, I'm not predetermining the outcome, I'm just empowering the conversation. That's a difficult balance, because what you can't become on the flip side is to be parav, to be neutral. We're not neutral. I believe in things. Gesher believes in things. It's a patriotic Jewish organization. But we believe that if there's Shivim Panim LaTorah, if there's 70 faces to Torah, then there is 70 faces to Zionism and 70 faces to Israeli society. And it's a Jewish value that variety is the power. It's the ability not to be stuck on a single dogma, which actually is the thing which protects the future of the Jewish people. The fact that no Jews look alike. We have Taimani Jews, and Moroccan Jews, and Ethiopian Jews, and Polish Jews, and American Jews, and British Jews, and Israeli Jews, and so on and so forth. It's not a race issue from that perspective. It's a civilization, it's a people, it's a religion, it's all of those things together. It's actually the fact that it's not just, I'm tied to a flag and Paris. Okay? It's not the tricolor. It's something more complex than that. And it takes time to think about that, to open your mind to that, to understand I can be faithful to my position inside of that circus of Judaism, and still appreciate that within that orchestra there are other there are other melodies. It's not postmodern in the sense of there's no truth.
Right.
It's postmodern in the sense of I'm sure I have 80% and I know there are other ways to reach this truth together, and in fact your 20% or my 20% and your 80% actually together combine to make. I'm not negating the power of truth.
Right.
I'm just taking a modest position of saying I'm not 100% sure I have all of it.
Right, because I was going to ask you, like, do you run up against the fact that some religious Jews may say, look, I can do this to a point, but I can't license other things. I can't now go and say Shabbat is something other than what is constrained by the Jewish law, for example.
Absolutely.
Right? And they're never going to say that, and they shouldn't say that, right? So do you get pushback in that regard in them saying...
So at a Gesher level, we obviously deal with that, and we get pushback in that sense. And in fact, there is an emerging kind of flip to that. So yes, obviously, I can't give up on my religious ideals. It's the Torah truth. It's what I was given in Mount Sinai. It's not mine to compromise on. It's the Shulchan Aruch. So yeah, that's true. I think the best way for me to answer that often is to be pragmatic and say, okay, I accept your position. You represent a percentage of Israeli society. We're going to stay here and they're going to stay here. And now let's figure out how that works.
Right.
And by the way, I think we want Shabbat to be a central theme for Israeli society. How are you going to do that if 80% of the country does not believe in the Shulchan Aruch?
Right.
And by the way, if you ignore it, the 80% will do what they were going to do anyway.
Sure.
They'll go to the mall. They'll go to the beach. You know, by staying within your pure halachic definition of what Shabbat looks like, you're not going to assist anybody else to be closer to that, even from your perspective.
Well, I think that they would say that, look, so yes, we're going to go out and try to educate, and again, there's the danger of missionizing, of course. Okay. But we're going to go out and try to bring people close.
I think Israeli society has its missionaries.
Right.
They have a benefit. It's limited. There is a great deal of pushback because it's considered by people who are not religious to be patronizing.
Sure.
And if you take the responsibility of saying, okay, I'm a Shulchan Aruch Yid, and I'm going to missionize, I say Gesundheit. But I'm saying, let's just analyze, let's be rational for a second and say, what's the impact of that? What's actually happening? And what does that mean for the millions of people who on Shabbat are going to the mall?
Right. My only point was I don't think that at the end of the day can really religious Jew at the end of one of these seminars say, you're right, let's strengthen a cultural Shabbat experience, or will they never get to that point?
Let me tell you about a program that we have incubated here, which is exactly in that sort of dotted line.
Yeah.
One of our alumni was the Deputy Minister for Education and a prominent member of the Beit Yehudi party, Avi Wurzman.
Okay.
Great guy. And a religious guy, a Shulchan Aruch Yid, okay? Believes in Shabbat, keeps Shabbat. We created a series of programs whose title is Shalom Shabbat. And what we did was, in order to get around the Shulchan Aruch, we do it during the week. So we brought Shabbat, the ideas of Shabbat, and we're talking about them and doing in midweek. So it's Kabbalat Shabbat on Thursday, if you will. All right, so it's music and piyut and comedy, and it's a combined cultural gig delivered at a community level with proper professional. It's not like neighborhood guitarists. It's top line
Daniel Goldman level musicians.
Not quite. It's well-known brand name singers and poets and artists and so forth, who are all coming together. We built a unique set of programs that brings Shabbat out of the debate, argument of whether we should have public transport or not have public transport, and bring that to the community.
Yeah.
And it's for religious people and for secular people, and it's open to all, and it's attractive to all.
Yeah.
All right, nobody's forced. It's not closed audiences. It's people deciding to come. And this was a way for us to bring the values of Shabbat in a non-threatening way to everybody, without anybody feeling like, on the one hand, I need to keep Shabbat, and on the other hand, somebody else saying, I'm licensing somebody else not to keep Shabbat.
Right.
And we've actually spun that out. It's now funded by the Education Ministry, and it's been taken over by Ortor Stone, and if you will, it's an exit for us.
Right.
And that started here. And it's a creative, non-sectoral set of programming that allows everybody to take part and experience and discuss Shabbat without it turning into Shulchan Aruch or not Shulchan Aruch. That's no longer the axis of the argument.
Right.
There are lots of attempts to do that on Shabbat Yisraelit, and what they call it, the Rabbi Goldstein's.
Shabbat across.
But the
Shabbat
problem
project.
with those things is that what tends to happen is religious people host non-religious people, and most religious people won't be hosted by non-religious people. And then the non-religious people say, well, that's just Kiruv. Okay, and for those who want it, great, but that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for Shabbat is ours, it's not yours.
Right.
All right, this is the thing, but it has real practical implications. If rabbis don't get to grips with what a Jewish sovereign country has to do on Shabbat in order to be a Jewish sovereign country, then it will just be secular. That's the default.
Right.
The default is not how do we run the electric company, which is everybody gets electricity that needs it or wants it, and on the other hand we minimize the desecration of Shabbat or whatever.
Right.
Or if we're going to have if there is 80% that wants public transport, how do we do it in a Shabbat style way?
Right.
And I don't mean the kind of kosher style restaurants where it looks kosher but it's not kosher. It's a Rubicon, I think, that people have to cross, because with the responsibility of having a sovereign state comes the responsibility of thinking like a sovereign state. All right, we don't have that history of halachic development in the Shulchan Aruch because we didn't need it. Not in the shtetl, and not in New York, and not in London. We only need it here, and it's only been a question 40, 50 years, 70 years. So we don't have, like we have with kashrut, and we have with monetary laws, and there's a whole vast array of rich jurisprudence and halachic development on almost everything, except when you're running a country.
Right.
Now, if there is rabbinic thought about that, they have a seat at the table. If there's no rabbinic thought about that, they won't have a seat at the table. I'm like, I'd like you to have a seat at the table. And I'm saying that I'm religious, but even if I wasn't religious.
Right.
And actually, stick my neck out, 70%, 80% of the country, religious or not, are interested in what Judaism has to say about this.
Right.
But they don't feel compelled by the obligation of mitzvah. So that can't be, for them, the only defining quality. They're happy to understand what that means, but it cannot be the exclusive definition of how we're going to run the public sphere. And how do you find that balance?
Right.
That is the redemption that we seek, right?
Yeah.
That is, I don't see the redemption as a guy coming on a white donkey. I see the redemption as how we build a wondrous society where we can figure these things out.
These are exceedingly complicated questions and issues, and it's an amazing thing that there are people willing to dive in to deal with them, and especially in your case as a volunteer, as a layperson, and probably dealing with lots of things like fundraising and all the unfun parts of it, although it sounds like you get to actually be in the room as well for some of the conversation. In any event, Gesher is a magnificent institution trying to do these things. Tell us where people can learn more about it.
Sure. So Gesher, G-E-S-H-E-R, Gesher.co.il is our main homepage. From there you can get to an English homepage. There's a sort of broad description of all of our activities. You can follow me personally on Facebook, Daniel Goldman. You can follow me on Twitter. Gesher has its own Twitter and Facebook also, in English and in Hebrew. It's something which we probably need to invest in a little bit more, so it's there.
The chairman of the board, let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly pushing that. As with most organizations, they like to invest on doing,
That's right.
not shouting. I'm like, if we don't shout, it's like a tree falling in the woods, right? But we do publish in English and in Hebrew. Obviously, we also have mailing lists and all the rest of it if you really want to be excited about it. Follow me, and I will guide you through some of these really exciting questions. And I want to sort of maybe finish, if we're getting towards the end of it.
Yeah.
The world is coping and dealing with some really big questions. The future of Western democracy, the position of immigrants, globalization versus Rust Belts, technology versus loving my neighbor, my friend on Facebook who lives 10,000 miles away and the neighbor across the street that I never speak to. Europe, countries defining on the sort of the pendulum between ultra-nationalism and ultra-universalism. And maybe I'm completely crazy, all right? In fact, I think I am. But a lot of these questions are questions that we are dealing with and grappling with here in Israel. The balance between universal values and particular values, the balance between protecting the nation state of Israel as the state of the Jewish people, and how we treat and deal with minorities and immigrants, okay? My dream is that we don't lag the world on these issues, but we enlighten the world on these issues. And we have the ability to do that. And we have the people and the thinking, and it's Israel and the diaspora, and it's using those different experiences and skills together. We absolutely can be that light unto the nations, because all those things are happening here, and the spotlight, as you well know, is on us, and we can rise to that challenge and be at the front of it. And that's my dream for Israel, and that's why I passionately spend my time here at Gesher.
A beautiful dream and inspiring passion. Daniel Goldman, thank you so much for joining us.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Jews You Should Know. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.